All right, if you've got a history exam on the horizon, then you are in exactly the right place. We are about to do a super fast review of the First World War, hitting all the essential causes and consequences you absolutely need to know. Let's dive in. So here's the big question, the one you really need to wrap your head around. How did the Great War, which people ironically called the war to end all wars, end up directly causing an even more terrible conflict just 20 years later? If you can understand that chain reaction, you've pretty much mastered this topic. We're going to walk through this chronologically, which should line up perfectly with your syllabus. We'll kick things off with the tensions brewing in Europe, then pinpoint the exact spark that lit the fuse. After that, we'll dig into the peace treaty that went so wrong, look at the world's first big attempts at global security, and finally, we'll connect all those dots right to the start of World War II. Okay, first up, Europe before 1914. Now, this was not a happy, peaceful place. The best way to think about it is like a giant powder keg, just stuffed with tension, packed with suspicion, and pretty much just waiting for a single reason to explode. The first key ingredient in that powder keg was something called aggressive nationalism. Now, this wasn't just, being proud of your country. This was a toxic, dangerous belief that your nation was number one and everyone else was inferior. This way of thinking led directly to a hunger for empires, imperialism, and it created a really scary culture where people believed that the only way to solve problems was with military force. And this intense nationalism literally split Europe's most powerful countries into two armed camps. On one side, you had the Triple Alliance, Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy, and staring them down was the Triple Entente, England, France, and Russia. With these huge military alliances in place, everyone was suspicious of everyone else, and the entire continent was on a hair trigger. When things are that tense, all it really takes is one little spark, and that spark came in the summer of 1914 in a city called Sarajevo. This right here is the immediate cause of the war, and I guarantee you're going to be asked about it on your exam. And speaking of exams, dates are a big deal. So I've got a fantastic little memory trick for you to make sure you never, ever forget the date of the assassination that kicked the whole thing off. I know it sounds ridiculous, but just remember this one weird sentence. Twin, 8, June, by knife tea, and fork tea. It's actually a pretty simple code. Twin 8 sounds like 28. June is, June. Knife tea sounds like 19. And fork tea sounds like 14. Put it all together, and what do you get? June 28th, 1914. That was the day that Archduke Franz Ferdinand, who was the heir to the throne of Austria-Hungary, was shot and killed during a visit to Sarajevo. This is the moment, right here, that the fuse on that powder keg was finally lit. So who was behind it? Well, this wasn't some random attack. It was planned and carried out by a secret society of hardcore Serbian nationalists. They called themselves the Black Hand, or even more dramatically, the Union of Death. Their big goal was to create a greater Serbia, and they saw the Archduke as a major obstacle. And after the assassination, events just spun out of control with terrifying speed. Look at this timeline. Almost a month later, Austria-Hungary gives Serbia a list of impossible demands. And just a few days after that, on July 28th, exactly 1 month after the shooting, they declare war. Instantly, that whole alliance system we talked about just kicked in, and within a week, all of Europe's major powers were dragged into a massive war. 4 years and millions of deaths later, the war finally came to an end. But the peace that came after, well, in many ways, it was just as important as the war itself. Let's shift gears to the Treaty of Versailles and see how this so-called peace actually planted the seeds for the next war. So the terms of this peace were basically decided by the winners, a group known as the Big Three. You had President Woodrow Wilson from the US, Prime Minister Lloyd George from Britain, and Prime Minister George Clemenceau from France. Now, what's absolutely critical to remember here is who wasn't in the room: Germany and the other defeated countries. They had no say, no input, no nothing. This was a peace treaty dictated to them, not negotiated with them. And one of the most brutal terms was the reparations bill. Germany was ordered to pay for all the damages from the war. And the price tag they came up with? $33 billion. I mean, just think about that number back then. It was an absolutely astronomical, impossible sum. And it was designed to do one thing: cripple the German economy for generations. But honestly, that insane bill was just the beginning. This treaty was a systematic humiliation of an entire country. Germany was forced to sign a war guilt clause, taking all legal and moral blame for starting the war. Its military was practically dismantled, its most valuable industrial land was seized, and all of its overseas colonies were just given away. Every single term was like another calculated blow to German pride. So you can imagine how the German people felt. To them, this wasn't peace, it was just plain revenge. There's a great quote from the time that sums it up perfectly, calling the treaty a black spot that Germans desperately wanted to wash away. And that deep feeling of national shame, that burning desire for vengeance, well, that became an incredibly powerful political weapon just a few years down the road. Now, even though the Treaty of Versailles was mostly about punishment, it did have one big, hopeful idea tucked inside it, an idea meant to prevent all future wars. This led to a completely new map of Europe and the creation of a brand new international organization. A noble idea for sure, but as we're about to see, it was a total failure. So, in 1920, the League of Nations was born, and you gotta admit, its goals were pretty incredible. The whole point was to get rid of secret alliances, for countries to reduce their weapons, to settle arguments with words instead of wars, and for all nations to work together to stop any country that got out of line. It was really the world's first big shot at collective security. But it just didn't work, and for your exam, you need to know why. Well, for starters, the United States, whose president came up with the idea, never even joined. That was a fatal blow from day one. On top of that, the League had no army of its own. It could pass resolutions, it could condemn people, but it couldn't force anyone to do anything. It was all bark and no bite. So when guys like Mussolini and Hitler came along, they just openly defied the League because they knew it was powerless to stop them. And this brings us right to our final section, where all the pieces of the puzzle snap into place. We're going to see exactly how the humiliation from the peace treaty and the complete failure of the League created the perfect storm for the rise of Nazism and the start of the Second World War. The easiest way to think about this is like a four-step domino effect. Okay, so domino 1. The humiliating treaty makes Germans feel ashamed and desperate for revenge. Domino 2. Those insane reparations payments crush the economy, leading to chaos and widespread poverty. Domino 3. A radical politician named Adolf Hitler comes along and expertly uses all that anger and desperation, promising to rip up the treaty and make Germany great again. And finally, domino 4. He keeps his promise. He breaks the treaty, rebuilds the army, and starts invading other countries, which leads directly to World War II. See, it's a direct line. And this, right here, is the biggest takeaway for your exam. The Treaty of Versailles is the ultimate example of how the way a war ends can be just as important as how it begins. A peace treaty built on humiliation and revenge doesn't solve problems. It just creates new and often much more dangerous ones. The seeds of World War II were planted in the very document that was supposed to end World War I. Which leaves us with one final, pretty heavy question to think about. If the world leaders back in 1919 had chosen a path of reconciliation instead of revenge, could the darkest chapter of the 20th century have been avoided altogether? It's one of history's biggest and most tragic what-ifs. Thanks for tuning in.